It's early in spring practice, but Washington's defensive line is showing that it's not only deep, but it's got a ton of talent.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Nick Lemkau. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And Nick, we got a tremendous show coming at all the everydayers out there on this Wednesday, because we are just getting back from Washington's 4th spring practice, and it's going to be a defensive heavy show. We'll talk about some shout outs, some other things that might have stood out to us from the practice at the end, but I really wanted to make sure that we talk about the secondary, because a lot of these young guys are showing major just steps in their development. And we'll get to that a little bit later on as the depth really shines through, because I think that statement holds doubly true for the defensive line, where, let's be real, there are a ton of talent, a ton of questions, about this group that need to be answered in the 2026 season. But the more we watch, and even when people are going to look at this and say, there's a true freshman right now starting at defensive tackle in Derek Colman-Brusa, I look at this group and I say, I'm pretty comfortable with what this looks like.
Yeah, and it's more than just him, but sticking with Derek Colman-Brusa to start, we went over to kind of where they were hitting the sleds in the corner of the field, and my impression watching these guys hit the sleds is when Colman-Brusa came up, like the amount of power, it was different than some of these other guys hitting that dummy. He has some serious strength for being a true freshman, really stands out among this defensive line group. Physically, we talk about all the time, he's just south of 300 pounds and really can move like an edge on the inside of the defensive line. So really a quality piece there. Now that they're in full pads, you can really see that physicality coming out, not just with him, but with some of these other defensive linemen. We saw DeSean Watts make a couple plays on the inside as well. Just getting around the protection and getting in the quarterback's face. I had him down for 2 quarterback pressures today during the team periods, which is impressive coming from the inside of that line for the size that he is, the agility that he has to really make an impact in the front of that defense. It was impressive today in the team periods.
No, absolutely. So I want to go back to your Derek Colman-Brusa thing for just a second, because as you do a tremendous job, especially over on TikTok, you were filming some content. You walk by me, you go, man, Derek Colman-Brusa, that just sounds different. And I was like, yeah, that's certainly going to play. It's so much fun to just like hear that noise of, because you can tell like when it's turning heads, even among the other coaches and the defensive line and whoever else might be standing over there. And that was something that very quickly stood out about Derek Colman-Brusa. But I'm really glad you mentioned DeSean Watts, because it's very clear that Washington is going to be relying super heavily on this trio of transfer defensive tackles in Watts, in Darin Conley, and whenever he's healthy and able to take the field, and Kai McClendon as well. And watching DeSean Watts rush the passer today, I'm glad you mentioned those pressures, because there was one rep in particular on the East Field before they moved inside the stadium for the last half or so of practice, where it was just a nice little rip move. And he's one of those guys where you and I have talked about him before. He's just so wide that you don't necessarily always expect that level of explosiveness to go along with the physicality. And we've said it several times when you and I have done these now weekly shows, whenever you're on, he is somebody who can absolutely just really give this defensive line a boost if he shows that he can be a capable pass rusher, obviously since he's coming up from the FCS level. But seeing moves like that and seeing just kind of the athleticism that he holds in that frame is really exciting. And I think that just kind of brings us to one of the main things that you and I wanted to talk about when it comes to the depth of this unit, because you and I both wrote down the second team defensive line that we saw today, which was in the Ryan Walters bear front, where you got 3 defensive tackles and 2 stand-up outside linebackers, which had Devin Hyde and Ramzak Fruin on the edge. And then the interior was Watts and Omar Khan playing the 2, pseudo 3-4 defensive end sort of roles. And then T.I.U. Mukais at nose tackle. And I look at that group and I just think, again, untested relatively with pretty much all of those guys, right? Where Devin Hyde obviously played in every game last year and looked really solid, and this coaching staff is very excited about him. But that group as a whole, that group is going to get a lot of run, and it looks like it's going to be very impactful.
Yeah, a lot of future talent. I think that's the thing that I thought immediately was like there's just a lot of guys there that have a lot of eligibility remaining. So, some true freshmen and a lot of really talented and athletic players along the entire defensive line. Even when you go into the inside to the tackle and then the zero technique right on the inside. I mean, going back to DeSean Watts for a second, one of the things that I think makes his game stand out on the inside is his hand quickness and hand strength, like the way he's able to fight with his hands on the defensive line. Even when they do the drills, where they do like those forced fumble drills and some of those things where they kind of do individual warm-up sessions, position specific, the power that he can generate just with his hands, I think is really something that allows him to create that separation in the pass rush as an interior defensive tackle to get in on the quarterback. And you see a similar thing with T.I. Umakais on the inside as well. Another really big player, true freshman coming in from Colorado, just exceptional strength with his hands and ability to kind of, separate from the offensive lineman and get around those blocks and to get into the run lanes and into the passing windows. It's exceptional talent and strength. I mean, when they hit those sleds, it stands out. Darin Conley's another guy who, similar to Derek Colman-Brusa, when I was standing over there, the pop that he made when he hit the sled, he's another really strong upper body guy, 12 starts last year at Ball State. He's someone that's going to, I think, make an impact on this defensive line as well. There's a lot of options, especially for a group that's replacing so much from last season. I mean, there's a lot of different things this group can do up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the questions come in, right? Where it is so many new guys in one facet or another, where it's Elinneus Davis is somebody who's really popped throughout the spring to me as well, where there are so many times where you look up and there's a defensive tackle in the backfield. It's Elinneus Davis again. Elinneus Davis again.
He had a sack and the tackle for loss today, according to my unofficial stats during team period.
The unofficial stats. Yeah. I'm going to give you credit for that. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. It's stuff like that where there was a play where I think it was Brian Bonner who he just ate up in the backfield, where he shows that combination of power and quickness that you're really looking for from this defensive tackle unit. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about being able to pair him with a guy like Derek Colman-Brusa, where we're obviously going to see a little bit more of that movement of Derek probably around the formation. Maybe when we see some more Kai McClendon, maybe when we see just some of these other guys continue to just add that depth of rotation and get comfortable as spring practice rolls on. And we see Ryan Walters try to experiment with some things up front a little bit. But it's just one of those things where I look at what the interior of this defensive line is going to look like, because, we mentioned that 5 down front that we saw with the second unit. I feel like we're going to see some more of that with the first team as well. And I don't know if Elinneus is the guy they're going to want to try out at nose tackle. There are a whole bunch of different ways that the interior of the defensive line rotation can work out. But Darin Conley is, I'm glad you pointed him out, just one of those guys where, just like DeSean Watts, if he can prove that he can get after the quarterback at the Big Ten level, that's just another guy who really changes everything that you want to do up front as you look to improve on a group that had 24 sacks last year, which was 12th in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and you look at that front with Darin Conley and the experience that he brings. I think it's really solid. Just the amount of rotation, and on the interior specifically, you mentioned Elinneus Davis, who last season, if you look at the PFF numbers, he played a lot of time at the nose tackle spot, whether he was lining up there or shifting or whatever. But they had several snaps out of his. I think it was like 480 snaps on the season or something like that. A good majority of those were at the nose tackle, so he has experience there. But they can move him to the outside and bring some of these, bigger bodied guys kind of in on the inside that have that strength that we talk about. And then, we were talking about that second team group, but when they go with the first team, those kind of stand up outside linebacker spots, we're going to see players like X-Ray Alexander, who wasn't in uniform today, or guys like Zadrius Randy-Saleh coming up and playing on the edge like that. And that's just another way that you can really multiply this defensive line into different things. Because you could go 5 down front, which is typically, your heavy set defensive front, but you could have 2 guys on the edge like X-Ray Alexander, Zadrius Randy-Saleh with legitimate speed and agility. And that's a fast defensive front with 5 guys on it going, hat on a hat. That can really open things up for the middle linebackers, the nickel, especially against the run. Like that's a really, it could open up a lot of different things, I really think, for that middle of that defense.
No, absolutely. And that's why I talk about getting creative. And I'm glad you mentioned that Elinneus did play those snaps at nose tackle last year. I say what I say because I think that as this goes on and as we start to see some of these different combinations come into play, you can stick it to DeSean Watts in there. as a first team nose tackle. And all of a sudden that just changes everything that you want to do along the interior of the defensive line in terms of where you can line, whether it be Derek Colman-Brusa, Elinneus Davis, whoever else up, to get them a more favorable matchup, because Deshaun Watson's a guy who can eat up those double teams. And it's why you go prioritize a guy like that in the transfer portal. And I'm really curious to see how all that's going to work out, because as you mentioned with X-Ray, with Zadrius Rennie-Saleh, if those are guys who can just give you that explosiveness as a pass rusher off the edge, which we saw both of them do at different points in time last year, it just continues to just add to what Ryan Walters can do on the back end, which is exactly where we want to take this conversation, because this secondary is developing at a really fun rate.
I'm Clea Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. UCLA made history by winning its first NCAA Women's Basketball National Championship, dominating South Carolina 79-51. The Bruins controlled the game from start to finish with elite defense and balanced scoring, finishing the season 37-1. Star center Lauren Betts was named Most Outstanding Player, leading a team effort that capped a 31-game winning streak. Under head coach Corey Close, UCLA secured a landmark title that has been decades in the making. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes. I'm coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
So, Nick, as we move on here, we've talked a lot about these starting corners in Emmanuel Conley, in Dylan Robinson, what those guys are going to do, even Rashawn Clark, who we're not going to see over the course of spring practice. And I feel like today, now that we, got to see a little bit more of an extended run, and whether it be team periods or 7-on-7, we really got to see what this secondary is going to look like behind those guys, where one guy I know you want to talk about is Elias Johnson. I think that Ramon Adams is somebody else who has really impressed over these first couple of days. And again, I know I keep saying this, but as spring practice goes on, I'm just so curious to see what this is going to look like in a week, 2 weeks from now, because especially getting to talk to the wide receivers today, that's a group that I feel like has looked really solid. And today, especially, it felt like the defensive backs got the better of them several times.
Yeah, after practice, just hearing Desmond Roebuck and Rasheed Williams talk about that, they're keeping track of who's winning these battles between the defensive backs and the receivers. And it's really interesting to hear, because, the defensive backs are playing pretty well. Dylan Robinson had an interception today in one of the 11-on-11 sessions, kind of got in front of a pass. I think it probably would have been a sack. I had that as one of Elinneus Davis's sacks, because he got in there on that one. But yeah, Elias Johnson is a player that I highlighted, I think, a month or so ago, as someone not to forget about. It 6'2", 180 pounds in the secondary, that had an interception, I believe, in the spring game last season. And I think he's progressing well. Today he had 2 pass breakups during 7-on-7, and he also had a really physically really hard hit on one of the wide receivers. I think it was Mason James during that same period.
Yes.
So just really getting a boom out of the defensive sideline. And one of those pass breakups was I thought a really excellent rep. It's kind of an outside release by the wide receiver, and he tracked him really well, made a play on the ball. It was a physical contact kind of play. It's practice. There's no flag on the field, but it was good contact, but I thought he made a good play on the football.
Was that the one, and nobody who was at practice, unless you're at practice, you're not going to know. Was that the one on Jordan Clay?
I didn't have a good angle.
Sideline?
It was on the near sideline, right in front of the bench. So it was kind of tough to see.
So I was standing right there.
Yeah, you were a little closer than me.
Yeah, so I was standing, and that was the moment where it just kind of hit my head. I was like, we're talking about the secondary today.
Yeah.
Because that was one of those moments where over the first couple of years, Elias Johnson was somebody that got challenged on a lot of those routes because he was a little bit underweight.
Well, think back to the first spring practice of 2025. He got beat twice in a row by Omari Evans on the first day.
Yes, and that's exactly why I want to talk about that, because we saw that development from him in particular, where I noticed that specifically at the catch point. Like I said, I was standing right there, and it was one of those things where when Elias Johnson got here, he was one of those guys where it's, okay, you see why you want to bring in a player like this, but you do need to be patient with him, because he's got all the traits in terms of the size, the length, the athleticism. He checked all those boxes, but he came in at somewhere around 160 pounds. And obviously when you had Thaddeus Dixon at that time and Ephesians Prysock, you felt comfortable about not, needing him on the field right away. And then of course this last season, Tacario Davis, Dylan Robinson comes in and just looks awesome from day one, along with Ephesians. Rashawn Clark has his breakout, obviously in the nickel, but it was one of those things where it's another year of, okay, you can be patient. You don't need him right away. And now this season where there are those spots to fight for on the depth chart, because we know Rajon Duncan's not getting here till the summer. I feel like that's a guy who can very quickly come in and establish himself at one of those spots. He's fighting with Ramon Adams. He's fighting with Elijah Durr, who I want to talk about here in a minute, with Jaron Jones, Kasani Giles, all of these other guys. And you were kind of looking for him to take that jump in terms of the physicality and the strength and being able to not just, make some of those plays on the ball, but turn some of them into interceptions. And it feels like those things are going to come if, what we saw today was any sort of indicator of that.
Yeah. And, he's put on a good bit of weight too. Like you mentioned, he was, a little undersized. He's 6'2", so he's got some length, but a little undersized physically when he arrived. And I think he's done a good job of getting bigger. That was a comment I think the defensive coaches made the Monday before spring practice started. A lot of these defensive backs have gotten a lot bigger. Same with the wide receivers. Like it's just a much more physical battle between, both sides of the ball there. And Elias Johnson's a good representation of the growth that can happen, especially playing behind some experienced guys. You mentioned Thaddeus Dixon, Ephesians Prysock, guys like that have a lot of experience. And he's been able to kind of fine tune his game in the second and third string. And now it's showing up, in 7-on-7s, he was kind of rotating in with the start. They kind of mix it up a lot, but he was on the field quite a bit and he was making plays that was getting the defensive sideline really going. And I think that's really promising, especially for the competition as you look towards the summer when guys like Rashawn Duncan are going to show up over the summer and there's going to be a lot of competition in that room. I think that's really good to take those steps now to kind of prepare for even more competition in the depth side there.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of competition, that was one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about Elijah Durr, because he was somebody who, during the pre-spring press conference, Jed Fish was very quick to point him out. And I was saying this to somebody earlier today. It might have been you. I don't even remember at this point in time, where you look at what this class was in terms of the rankings and in terms of some of the things that are going to catch people's eye. And Elijah Durr sort of fell by the wayside. I don't think that was fair. I said this to you right before we hit record. Rajon Duncan wound up being a top 60 player in the nation, according to Rivals. Gavin Day was a top 100 player, according to 247 Sports. Jaron Jones also had that 4-star ranking. So obviously that's what's going to grab people's eyes when they go through and they look at a class. But you look at Elijah Durr, who is somebody who was an all-state level triple jumper in high school. And I feel like that very clearly shows up when you look at his frame and just how fluid and explosive he is with his lower half. But then you look at just how strong he is in press coverage and the way he is at the catch point as well. He's one of those guys where if he doesn't make the depth chart, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that says anything about him this year in particular. But if he's somebody who, all of a sudden we wind up halfway through the season, it's, hey, Elijah Durr has played in every game on special teams, and he's someone that this coaching staff very clearly has high hopes for. That's not something that's going to shock me.
Yeah, 6 foot 186. I mean, he's physical for a true freshman coming in and already making a play. He had a pass breakup today at practice, according to my unofficial stats again. But yeah, he's playing really well. And like you mentioned, he moves really fluidly. That's one of the things that's been a common characteristic among kind of the cornerbacks in this room since Jed Fish arrived, even with the 6'4" corners. These are all guys that have exceptional, footwork, fluidity, and ability to kind of track receivers in man coverage. That's something that they're asked to do a lot, which is not super typical in college football, being asked to go one-on-one on the outside. With the way Ryan Walters, runs his defense, they put a lot of trust in the cornerbacks. And when you can get a true freshman out here like Elijah Durr, making these plays already this spring and kind of, learning the system, like you said, whether he's on the depth chart or not, that's not really a concern right now. More so, it's a factor of, is he going to develop his game to the point where he's really getting a lot better in man coverage and being physical. And today, the pass breakup he had was, a physical play against the wide receiver. Seems like they all are. I mean, we're saying that constantly. These guys battle really hard in the secondary, and they're coached to do so. Like there's a lot of physical contact. And I think that's a really, you want that, especially with these guys that, Ryan Walters really demands that kind of physicality. They want him to get up in the run game. They want him to be aggressive, and they want him to kind of be instinctual and, not over anticipate, but, trust their gut. And that's why a lot of these guys that start, you look at a guy like, in the secondary, Alex McLaughlin, a guy that he's reactionary. He's going to go make a play. And same with the cornerbacks last season. You see these guys that, they're going to trust their instinct and they're going to make a play, and their skill sets are fine-tuned enough that they're not going to over anticipate. And that's something that I think you can see for Elijah Durr already making kind of those plays as a true freshman in the secondary.
Yeah, I agree. And I wanted to take that a step further when you're talking about the physicality, because you talk about how unique this defense is in terms of what it asks the corners to do in man coverage, but it's also somewhat unique in terms of the way that they blitz them, whether it be, whoever's in the nickel or some of these guys on the outside, in terms of like, you go back to how Ryan Walters used Devon Witherspoon in Illinois, and what we saw, like I highlight this play a lot because I feel like it's a sign of things to come. When Dylan Robinson had the sack on Dante Moore in the Oregon game, there are so many different things like that I feel like are still coming, that Ryan Walters still has in his bag, but it's something he talked about last year, saying, yeah, like I had to kind of fit what my scheme was this year to the players that we had. And I don't think he meant that in a negative way at all. It was just, hey, I came in here in January. I didn't really have time to, build this, not necessarily build the scheme, but, I had to fit it to some different athletes at different spots. And I think that moving forward, now that we see, what Dylan Robinson, for example, does as a run defender, and what we're talking about seeing from some of these younger guys in an Elias Johnson, Elijah Durr, Ramon Adams is someone who fits into this description as well. As those guys continue to develop and we continue to see this defense build out under Ryan Walters, we're going to see some more of those things that he did kind of coin at Illinois, where I think we're going to see more rotations from whoever an outside corner is into a too high look, where we've seen all of those sorts of things come around over the years. And I think that this could be a big year for Ryan Walters to install more things like that.
Yeah, that kind of rotational thing was big at Illinois. They'd pull a cornerback and they'd kind of go a too high look. It's interesting you bring that up, because that's something that I think Ryan Walters is good at doing over time, is fine-tuning his cornerback's ability to be multiple in the secondary. They all call themselves defensive backs. They don't differentiate between safety and corner when you talk to them. They say they're defensive backs. And I think that's just one of the things in terms of mentality that these guys understand. Like, they need to be multiple to be successful in this defense. And that's something that we're going to see, especially, into year 2 with Ryan Walters. He said this spring already, they have a lot more momentum, and just, they're not doing install as much. They're kind of getting creative already. These guys know the playbook. The playbook is installed. And I think we'll see that, especially as Ryan Walters, tenure continues to move on here at Washington.
Nick, let's jump into some of our shout outs for practice 4. Right after a message from our good friends over at Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's the stat that says it all. In the time I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And we've got a message from our good friends over at Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps. Trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Nick, I'll let you lead us off today. Who's your first shout out from Tuesday?
Quarterback Elijah Brown. I thought that he had some good throws today.
I agree.
A little bit different skill set than DeMond. We've talked about this before. At 6'2", he doesn't necessarily scramble out of the pocket as much to create those throwing lanes, and I think he can generate a lot of power because of his strong lower half. He's a good thrower, and there was a couple outside throws today. I think there was 2 in a row during the same, it was either 7-on-7 period. Some really deep outside out routes from the other hash, or mid, throwing it all the way across his body to the sideline. I thought he made some really nice deliveries, on time, on target. Really looked good. He was running kind of with the second team during most of the team periods today, and I thought he really looked good. And that's promising for the competition, especially with these younger quarterbacks. Having a guy that's got that experience, 6 games played last year, started 3 of them for Stanford, and he played a little bit his true freshman year too that he redshirted. So that's an experienced guy that I think is already playing well, 4 practices in.
Yeah, absolutely. We've gotten a lot of questions about what that backup quarterback battle is going to look like. And the first couple of days, it felt like Treston Keeney-McMillan took the majority of the second team reps. And I think today was the first day we really saw Elijah Brown kind of, I don't want to say take hold of that position, but get that opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that this is why they brought him in. Because, as you said, you could see the arm talent. It really did pop. And he's someone who obviously doesn't have the mobility of a DeMond Williams, because there are very few people who do, but it's clear that he's got enough athleticism to navigate the pocket. And with that experience that you're talking about under his belt, I feel like those are all reasons that Jedd Fisch wanted to go out and get him, because there's I've seen a lot of questions like, hey, you got 5 scholarship quarterbacks in that room. How's that going to work? And it's one guy who took pretty much 99% of this, or 98% of the snaps, we should say, last season, and guys who have not seen the field. You have to go out and get somebody to bring in some kind of experience. And if he gets beat out, he gets beat out. And that's just the way that this program has been built by Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff, with that just competition mantra. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. I mean, they preach competition constantly. You ask the players about it. That's the one thing they bring up first. I mean, this is a healthy competition. They want to compete against each other to make each other better. And that's the thing, with Elijah Brown, that you mentioned his mobility. I don't necessarily think that his, he's not a running quarterback. I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think it's a good thing, because of his ability to maintain poise in the pocket. When you go back and look at kind of his film from Stanford, he made some really impressive throws, in the face of pressure as a redshirt freshman. Against Notre Dame, he had a 32-yard sideline pass. It was really impressive. He led Stanford to the win against Cal in their big rivalry game with similar throws. He's able to stand tall in the pocket and make confident throws down the field with accuracy and precision to his receivers, and not needing to kind of flee the pocket to create those throwing lanes. He's also physical enough with his size to take a hit and still make a confident throw. And that is going to, I think Keeney-McMillan is a guy that is similar physicality wise. Now he can run a little bit, but similar traits where they're a physical quarterback with a really good arm talent. I think that's going to really help McMillan develop as well, with a guy like Elijah Brown with that kind of experience and kind of similar-ish skill sets at the position.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. I wanted to go back to DeMond Williams for the first thing that I wanted to talk about, because I remember pointing this out to you when we were on the sideline, is Washington was installing a play that they ran a lot last season. It's the bootleg with the slide action route underneath, where DeMond Williams does have the option to tuck it and run or hit the receiver. I think it was Rashid Williams on the play when we were talking about it. And I'm really excited to see what that play is going to look like this year, because Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff have so many different options to be creative with who they put out there. And the person I wanted to talk about as that pertained to, because what I remember, just, to give all the everydayers a little bit of insight into our conversation, I said, whoever you think the fastest receiver on the team might be in some of those is going to be absolutely lethal. And then after practice, Kevin Cummings says, of the 3 freshman receivers, the guy who's the farthest ahead right now is Trez Davis. And I was really psyched to hear that, because he's a guy who I think brings a unique level of athleticism to this offense, where he showed at the high school level that he can stretch the field, that he can make plays at all 3 levels. And as somebody who does have that speed to be able to not only do that vertically, but to do it horizontally as well. And he's one of those guys where, if DeMond does have the option, because, I think it's very clear that Washington is prepping all 3 of these freshman receivers to burn their red shirts this season in some way, shape, or form. And with a guy like Trez, where he's the one where Washington has put Jordan Clay at the X spot. They've put Mason James in the slot. Trez is the one that they're talking about, saying we could use him at the Z, we could use him in the slot. We want to find different ways to just engage him and get him on the field. Having him in on a play like that just feels like a lot of fun to me because of the athleticism and what he can do after the catch and what we saw at the high school level. So he's one of those guys where I don't want to say he's that far ahead right now, but he was the guy who drew the most praise from Kevin Cummings. I think that that's just one of those plays where the threat of that athleticism and what it's going to do to one defender who has to make a choice on that play is something I can't wait to see this fall.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Desmond Roebuck when he arrived last summer and into the fall. The coaching staff made similar comments. Like, he's really progressed quickly. And it's not the same because it's not spring practice. But, when Jed Fish was asked about Desmond Roebuck last year, there was a lot of like, yeah, he's really developing quickly. He's a guy we think we can use often. There was other receivers in the mix that were freshmen that year, but Roebuck really stood out. And that's kind of what I see happening with Trez Davis, a guy who's at 6 foot, 190. He's a little bit bigger, like taller than Desmond Roebuck, but I think can be used in that similar way where when he moves laterally, I think he moves with confidence. And you see that with Roebuck, the confidence over the middle. Same thing with Davis. It's the speed over the middle, not necessarily like top end speed, but just quickness through the middle of a defense and on these routes that you're describing, kind of that option where DeMond can run it or pitch it off to his receiver kind of underneath. That's going to be, like you said, it could be lethal because of the speed from both guys and the quickness. And we saw that a little bit with Desmond Roebuck last year. Trez Davis is a guy who's trending in that same kind of direction.
Nick, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank to all you everydayers out there for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Feel like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click the little bell, so you don't miss when we post new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.